Mike.
I'm Brad.
And this is Ministry Chemistry.
Good. Can you say it faster?
Here we go.
Welcome to Ministry Chemistry, episode number 4. Oh my goodness, we've made it a whole month. Hello, everyone. I know they laughed because
Who would have thought?
Yeah, right.
seriously, we didn't. We weren't
One
sure.
and done.
But you're still here listening, and you might stop if we don't start immediately. So my name's Renee, just in case you need a reminded.
Still Mike.
And Brad.
And today we're going to talk about, I'm going to put myself on the spot. If you have listened to a couple of the past episodes, you know that I made the comment, sometimes Jesus isn't enough and you need more. We were talking about team dynamics and how you can be drawn to a magnetic team. And sometimes you want more than the Holy Spirit. And that's a super controversial statement. I don't actually totally agree with it, but I knew the sentiment behind it. So today we're going to kind of dive into that, talking about the fine line between being intentional, being analytic of our programs and our walks and our witness, and overthinking the Holy Spirit away. So what do you guys initially think of this whole idea? Can you overthink? Can you overdo it and just leave the Holy Spirit out of what you're trying to do in life, in ministry, in your work?
Well, absolutely. I think we all get to the point where even if we are fully connected with our walk with Christ, we get somewhat selfish in thinking that we can do it on our own, and we can take credit for things that the Holy Spirit is doing in our life, that we can say, hey, look what I did, but it had really nothing to do with you. They're just opportunities that the Holy Spirit gives you, and it's a dangerous place, because that's where the fall happens, is right after that, when you take credit for something that the Holy Spirit has really done in your own life. There is kind of a spiritual checking that has to happen. At least I've come to notice that.
Yeah, and I think, honestly, I don't think we talk about the Holy Spirit enough. So if you're listening, I bet you have talked to God this week or thought about maybe God in some way. I bet you talked about Jesus in some way or thought about Jesus in some way. How many of us talk about and think about the Holy Spirit?
Depends on what denomination you're a part of.
Well, there's that, right?
I mean, in all seriousness, it's funny because I think there's two spectrums here. There is the overthinking the Spirit away, and then there's overthinking the Spirit into things, and and completely excluding the analytical or the pragmatic, the practical approach to things. Like we over spiritualize things. So I think there's a balance between those two spectrums.
I'm gonna need like some examples, some real examples.
I hesitate. Let's just say
Why?
charismatic. There are charismatic churches and denominations who tend to lean more spiritual, the Holy Spirit responsible for everything.
So there's a reason for everything. There's a purpose for everything. God is in everything.
Yeah, I think you're skirting a dangerous edge,
Right.
and going that approach.
I've just
too.
offended somebody.
Yeah, I probably. That's why I'm like, I hesitate, because I probably offended someone. I didn't mean to. I'm just like, but I think there's two spectrums that we tend to lean, and maybe we're teetering back and forth depending on where we're at in life and stuff like that. But
Well, I can give an example that I think everyone who attends a church service could relate to. If you attend a church service where there's it's a contemporary setting, but maybe even in a traditional setting, and you have the choir director or the lead singer or a group of vocalists, there are some vocalists that you prefer over others. And on those Sundays or those Wednesdays or those times of worship, you might say, oh, I worship the best when so-and-so is leading. Now, I think there's truth to that, because I'm a pretty judgy person. Thank you. I'll acknowledge it. See, this is all about me, right? I'm a pretty judgy person, and I can sit there and go, oh, the way they worship just drives me insane. Like the way they always raise their hands immediately. Are they really feeling the Spirit, or are they totally faking it to get other people to raise their hands? You know, when I'm in my worst space, I can totally do that. At the same time, I do believe some people, their worship is hindered depending on who's in front of them and how they're focusing. That being said, is it enhanced by those in front of them and those leading, or is it only enhanced by the presence of the Spirit within them and within the body?
Oh, it's definitely enhanced by the crowd. Brad and I have talked about this at length with winter retreat versus a typical Sunday morning or
Absolutely.
Wednesday night. Winter retreat, it's louder, more active music. Teens are fully immersed in their group, and they're much more expressive. I would love to know how many of our teens, not just ours around this table, but like our denominations, our district, whatever, are as expressive on a Sunday morning or Wednesday night as they are at that retreat weekend when the band is saying, "Hey, come up to the stage. Let's."
And
the band is.
It's not.
Oh, I guarantee it's not. And I will say this: the band that we've used, they are awesome at making sure they're like, "Hey, this is going to sound like, it's going to look like a concert, but we are worshiping here, and we're inviting you to worship with us." They're very, very good. They're very, very cognizant of that, of saying, "This is not a concert. You are not here to watch us perform. We are here to worship collectively." But just the atmosphere itself produces a different kind of expressive nature than a Sunday morning or a Wednesday night does. So,
But they're also, a part of that is they're invited into
yeah.
worship.
Oh, that's a
They're-
great point.
Please be actively participating in worship rather than, hey, we're going to sing some songs. If you raise your hand, go ahead. That's all right. But no, there's jumping around. There's an active participation, engagement with not only the song, but the words of the song changes kind of how they engage.
And the Spirit? Because we do a really good job, I think, in worship specifically of
Producing
planning
the
it out,
Spirit.
producing the Spirit, which as a worship leader, I want to set a tone. I want to set an environment. I think there is a preparation that goes into worship.
Yeah.
I have dear friends who are worship leaders, and they might hate this conversation because I'm not negating all the work and preparing and planning that goes into things. I think it's vital and important and God honoring, definitely God honoring. But do we do so much and expect so much then based on what we do? Or are we truly setting the stage for the Spirit to move? And do we have to set a stage for the Spirit to move? Or is the Spirit going to move as the Spirit moves?
Well, it's funny because knowing the conversation that we were going to go into, I had to look up the verse, but it's 1 Thessalonians 5. Paul says, "Do not quench the Spirit." So I think there are atmospheres, and Paul there's a lot of context to that verse, but I think there are atmospheres and ways of worshiping that do quench the Spirit, if you will. We kind of like block out the Spirit's participation with us in worship. But Paul never says produce the Spirit.
We can't produce the Spirit.
Right. But we mask it as a production of the Spirit. I look at, and let me give an example of that.
Ooh, okay. See, he's going to give an example.
I look at, some people talk about being, God's Spirit was really active in that song. Well, my dad was moved to tears every time he listened to Desperado by the Eagles. Was the Spirit active in that song?
Oh, I've had friends have spiritual moments at Coldplay concerts and
Yeah.
U2 concerts.
Right. I'm not saying God works in mysterious ways. I'm not saying, but what I'm saying is there's an emotional attachment to songs and musicians and performances that maybe we convince ourselves is the Spirit moving within us when maybe it's not. Maybe it's just your own personal emotional attachment to that.
Emotions versus
whatever.
the Spirit.
Yeah.
It's the same thing with like phrases like God moments or God whispers. Or,
Yeah.
Is it truly the voice of God or the presence of God that you're sensing, or is it a memory of when he was there at one point and now there's just remnants of that? So if taking this outside church walls and worship context, if we prepare and ready ourselves and plan for the Spirit's movement in church spaces, what does that look like in non-church spaces? do we need to do preparations and plannings in our homes? Do we need to do preparations and plannings in our workplaces, in our car drives? I know some of the most beautifully Jesus following people who in the car are not so much. They're not so much. And they will say, I am not, but they are wrong.
Wow.
The Lord gives me all the words I say in the car. And everyone listening who's seen me drive is now going to they're going to write in. Write in. Go ahead. I dare you.
I wouldn't say, looking at the family environment, and I think Brad will agree with me on this. I don't think it's necessarily like preparation and production, but there's definitely intentionality. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. And not only that, but I would say even in a worship setting, it's not the production of, it's the anticipation of. We have to anticipate that the Holy Spirit is going to be there.
Yeah.
Not only in a worship setting, but in our families, in our everyday life. Just going to the grocery store at times, there can be a Holy Spirit moment that happens, but we have to anticipate that and be ready for it.
So here's one of my favorite things about Brad, and actually I'd forgotten about it until a friend of mine reminded me. So some friends of mine were listening to the podcast, and they wrote and they're like, hey, is that Brad so-and-so? And they, gave some details. I was like, yeah, that's Brad. And does he still have coffee with Jesus?
I still have coffee with Jesus every morning.
And I said,
so how did they know
goodness.
about that?
Because Brad spoke at some situation they were at, some conference or some retreat or something, and that's what stuck with them. So for those who don't know what coffee with Jesus is, Brad, will you please tell us?
I on my morning devotions, I at times have trouble concentrating. I get the things of my schedule in my head. I get things that are happening around me that distract me from really paying attention to what God is doing and speaking into my life. And Eric Samuel Tim spoke at several of the conferences I've been to, and he talked about having coffee with Jesus. And it changes. So I will get up, I will let everybody get ready, go to school, go to work, and I will sit down at my dining room table with my Bible, my notebook. I pour 2 cups of coffee, one for me and one for Jesus. I put it across the table from me, and not only do I spend time in the Word, but I just have a conversation, and it helps me concentrate. It helps me listen more, because when you sit and have coffee with a friend, you're intent on listening to them. So just having that cup of coffee sitting across from me makes it less of okay, I know Jesus is sitting across from me. No, he's really sitting across from me, and he's having a cup of coffee with me. So when I've shared that with people, they're like, you don't do that. I'm like, no, seriously, I do. In some people's mind, I waste a lot of coffee.
Oh, so you throw it away? Because I was just going to make a joke like,
I was
and then the
thinking
mug
the
is
same
empty.
joke.
The mug is empty.
No,
at
that's
the
not
end.
the joke I was thinking.
Oh, yeah, that's kind
No,
of
if he drinks it, I'm I'm sorry.
No, the joke I was thinking was, when you're done with your cup, do you ask Jesus, are you going to finish that?
I never drink Jesus's coffee.
And
He
then-
might be a tea guy, so
and then
that's
the
why
other
he
side,
doesn't
and then
drink
the other side of that is, did Jesus keep it warm for you, or do you need to nuke it for 45 seconds?
with the
Nuked
fire of the
Jesus
Holy
coffee.
Spirit.
Ooh, we could sell that.
That's funny.
No, I think it's an awesome principle. That is a perfect example of intentionality.
That's
what
right.
we're
Yeah.
talking about.
Yeah.
Jesus, Brad is like, you know what? It takes me a little bit more effort to get into that space to allow the Holy Spirit to work in me. So I'm going to do something as simple as pour a second cup of coffee and set it across the table as a reminder of trust that Jesus promises he's there with me
Absolutely.
all the time, but
That's right.
especially in those moments where I'm focusing on him. That's the perfect example of intentionality.
Well, and it's so freeing. And when I first heard you say it, I was like, wow, that's just such a different thing than I must do this from 7 to 7:30 because then check mark, I've got my Jesus time in, check mark, I've spent time in the Word this week, check mark, whatever it is. And for some people, that's just an impossibility in and of itself too. But when you make it like you're saying, a thing like you would with a friend or a spouse or a child or a family member, whoever it is, a neighbor, someone you're ministering to, a coworker, Jesus becomes more real. You're being intentional about the Holy Spirit, and he shows up.
He does.
He shows up.
Remarkably, he does.
Because
So,
he made space for him.
To kind of piggyback on that, I want to just mention something. You said in the beginning, we kind of mentioned back to, I think, episode 1, Jesus is not enough. I think it takes time for Jesus to become enough in the maturity of a believer. I would say for most like new believers or maybe maturing believers, that Jesus is not enough most of the time. And I think it takes a while. It takes intentionality of growing to the place where Jesus is enough. And that what we talked about the last episode was that confidence in our identity in Christ. It takes time to develop to that, but it also takes intentionality. And for me, it took the growing pains of doing it out of discipline and then hungering and thirsting for it. I think,
missing it when it's gone.
Yeah,
missing him, not it.
I think
Missing
that
him when
there's
he's gone.
intentionality in creating that internal hunger and thirst for time with God.
Absolutely. So for those who don't know this and are listening, I'm single, and Brad and Mike both have beautiful wives. And
That was not a plug, by the way.
no, it wasn't. Thank you, Mike. No, it wasn't. But I've started to follow more Christians who are adults and are single, and that's just some paths I've gone down. And one of them tweeted this recently. He said, "If marriage shows us the shape of the gospel, singleness shows us its sufficiency." And I will say, as someone who's been single most of my adult life, in and out of some relationships, but that's the truest statement. Because I think the Western church, and this will be a whole nother podcast series, so look forward to it, folks. The church, I think, really points us towards marriage as this be-all, end-all epitome of life. Maybe not even just Christian life, but life. And what you're saying is Jesus enough? The thing I teach students and talk about openly, and it doesn't always sit well with people, is, and what if all those people fall away? Sometimes I have to ask myself, if everything I have that is good if everything that I have in my life that I value and that I lean into for security, for peace, for joy, for whatever the thing is, if those tangible and sometimes intangible, because sometimes there are moments, fall away, will Jesus alone, who I always have, be enough? And so when I think about planning retreats or planning worship or going about my day with my task list and my work, and I think if all that happens today is Jesus shows up in a place, or I experience the Holy Spirit, or I share a God moment with someone, will that be enough to say today was a good day?
Yeah. I think Paul talks about, I think it's in Ephesians, singleness being enough, especially for those pursuing a higher calling.
But we don't really believe that. I mean, really, we don't
Well,
believe that. And this isn't a conversation about singleness, but we don't believe that.
Well, I mean, in within our holiness Wesleyan denominations particularly, I think we struggle with that celibacy of the Catholics. We struggle to understand that, and
so do the Catholics.
There is a biblical aspect to that.
Right.
I mean, you could definitely defend that with what Paul is talking about, but he also recognizes, hey, this ain't for everybody.
That's right.
For some, like singleness itself is going to be a distraction from Jesus.
But at the end of the day, single, married, coupled or not, have friends, have few friends, have many friends, whatever the case might be, have offspring, don't have offspring. Jesus, is he enough? Is he all you need to sustain your days and go about your life?
Yeah. To
he should be, but we don't want to should all over ourselves, right? As a dear friend of mine says.
You asked me earlier about examples as far as the quenching or explaining the Spirit away.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, I've struggled with that myself at times because I've seen people who take a very head approach, a mental aspect to Christianity in general. And I'm a thirst for knowledge kind of person. So I like information. I like sermons that teach me something. But there is a spiritual aspect to the church. There is the unexplainable. I mean, beyond just like, hey, the virgin birth and this guy literally rose from the dead. Beyond that, there's a working of the Spirit that's unexplainable, that no amount of information on earth is ever going to help you wrap your head around.
That's right. You should say that again. There's an unexplainable aspect to the Spirit that no amount of information or knowledge will help us wrap our head around. That's right. And I think that sentence lands harshly with some who also crave knowledge, but to those who that's a struggle to take in, I don't want to follow a God I can completely understand, because there are things about life I don't understand. And I don't want those to be bigger than my God. Not that I just don't want them to be. They aren't bigger than my God.
Right.
And there's an extraordinary element to what is the Christian church and how it's lasted to this day. And that is the Holy Spirit. So let's take a different view of this, overthinking the Spirit away, and talk about how we often compartmentalize our faith. Where do you all see people compartmentalizing their faith, keeping it in this box, in this corner, or on this day, in this hour, or in this space or environment, versus, integrating it into all the facets of their hours and minutes and moments?
This has been a point of conversation for the last couple of weeks within my ministry. Just being able to recognize the Holy Spirit and how He's working, if He's working, and the question that I keep asking is, how do you quantify the Holy Spirit? How do you quantify Him in your life?
Numbers, man, numbers.
That makes sense.
The Spirit must be moving because we just doubled in number. The Spirit must be moving because my
all
bank
about
account
the
is triple.
numbers. That's not the case. But what some of the conversations have come down to within my young adult group, emerging adult group, whatever you want to call them, is one of the things is the fruits of the Spirit. These are the ways that we can quantify how God is working in our lives. So we would go through each one of them: love, joy, patience, all of that. And at the end, I would ask the question, so how you doing? And everybody's like, no, I'm not doing well. Like, so is the Holy Spirit not working in your life? Or are you just not in tune with Him?
Ooh,
that's a gut check question.
It was a gut check question.
Is He not
for
working,
me?
or are you not in tune with Him?
I
thought
had to
you were
look at myself in the mirror after I asked that question. I'm like, dang.
Yeah, I thought you were going down the whole self-control fruit of the Spirit path. But
Oh no.
yeah, you went to
I went to the heart.
Yeah, man.
Yeah, and just as a side for those listening who want to look that up, it's Galatians 5 verses 22 and 23.
Dang, look at you.
Sometimes I know things. It's Galatians 5 verses 22 and 23, and it's a list of, is it fruit or fruits of the Spirit? This is the
Fruits.
is it plural?
I think it's plural.
Even though all of them are one fruit.
Yeah,
It's not like
a
shark and
pomegranate.
sharks. That's not about deer and deers.
Moose
Shark was a
and
bad
moose.
example. Mooses, Mises. I want a geese who lays gold eggs for Easter.
Okay, stop it.
It's okay. Watch Willy Wonka. Anyway, fruit of the Spirit. Those are the signs. Those are the gifts. Those are the fruits of His workings in your life.
Yeah.
But are you in tune to them? That's a great question.
So according to the NIV, it's Galatians 5:22. By the way, it is
23.
fruit, singular, of the Spirit.
I knew it.
But Greek.
That's why you looked it up, just to figure out fruit.
Yeah,
or
I wanted to
fruits?
see if it was fruit or fruits. But the Greek sometimes doesn't translate well, singular, plural. But
Anyway,
It's all Greek to me.
how'd that land with your emerging young adults, millennial Gen Zs?
It was a gut check, and it was actually 2 weeks ago, and we did not meet this past week, so we haven't had the follow up. But I'm anxious to hear how or if they've even remembered that conversation and how they've been able to identify it a little more since then.
I heard a pastor once say he takes a fruit of the Spirit every year and focuses on that as like his word of the year, and will go in the cycle until he dies of focusing on one every year. And I thought, well, why just focus? Like if I was focusing on peace for a whole year, there's a part of me that wants to focus on joy too. And so maybe once a week, or, you know, one word a week or something, or one. But how would you suggest becoming in tune with the Spirit?
Well, the author I read recently, podcast host, he talked about praying for the like individual fruits of the Spirit. And I think sometimes we have this assumption of, well, I have that fruit, but not that fruit. I'm an apple, but not a pear type thing. You know what I mean? And he was talking about Paul doesn't say that these are necessarily exclusive to one individual or the other.
Sure.
He's talking about being blessed by the whole multitude of fruit of the Spirit.
That's right. We pray for self-control.
Yeah, absolutely.
We pray for
and
our children to have self-control.
I was like, that is so simply enlightening. Yeah, it's such a simple thing, but it's sad to me that is enlightening to pray for fruit of the Spirit. Like, why wouldn't we do that? Of course you should do that.
And pray for others to experience the Spirit in their life.
Especially self-control.
You know, well, or joy. If I haven't said it yet, I'm going to say it again.
Well, we talked about the fruit of criticism, I think, last week or week before last.
Or if you have a crazy BRF, you can look that up. You know, if you have a crazy BRF and you're always like down in the dumps and droopy and mopey and like frowny, but I know
think it's
Jesus.
RBF.
Is it RBF?
Yeah.
BRF or RBF?
RBF.
I want joy for you.
You're a wallower.
I want you to know the Holy Spirit joy.
Yeah.
And I'm sad that you don't or can't display it. And maybe that's me I'm an ambivert, but I'm more extrovert sometimes in crowds like that, where I'm not going to let fix your face. You know Jesus.
Can I add one more?
You got about 30 seconds.
Major compartmentalization of the Spirit.
Yeah.
Finances.
Oh, you leave the Spirit out of your finances?
Yes.
Yeah.
You know what? I'm going to be involved in the church. I'm going to do everything. I'm going to give my time and my talent. Don't touch my treasure.
He used all T words too. So here's your
alliteration.
I love alliteration. So here are your questions for this week. Where are you overthinking the Holy Spirit, and where are you allowing him to work in your life? What other T words can you come up with that you need the Holy Spirit to work in? And are you a blueberry or are you a schnozberry? Schnozberry. Who ever heard of a schnozberry? I'm Renee.
I'm Mike.
I'm Brad.
And this has been Ministry Chemistry.